Hello, everyone, and welcome. Colleen and I are really excited to have you join us today. We have quite a variety of attendees. Some of you are already certified with our Craving Change program. Some of you will have certainly heard us at conferences or watched our webinars, and we'll be meeting some of you for the first time today. So we're very excited to meet with all of you. We know that the information that we're going to share will be helpful for all of you in one way or the other. And we're also going to be answering some questions we've received about the training and certification for the Craving Change program. So just a few points. Just going to get rid of my sign there. This webinar, oh, sorry, if you could advance the slide, please. So this webinar, just so you know, is being recorded, and we will post it on our Craving Change YouTube channel. There will be a link and a QR code towards the end of the webinar to have you access this resource package we've put together that has client handouts and worksheets for you. Just to note, the slides will not be available, and there aren't any continuing professional education points assigned to this webinar. We're really interested in hearing your questions and would welcome any comments that you have during the webinar, and you can use the chat feature for that. Also, although Colleen and I are very experienced and feel quite comfortable with a lot of different things that we do, technology is still a challenge. And so today we're welcoming and very thankful to have Patricia Regier as our moderator. She's a learning experience design specialist with Regier Education. Hi, Patricia. She's
Hi.
sort of going to be in the background for us.
That's right.
We're excited to learn how to do this because this hopefully isn't our last live stream webinar. All right, so we'll get started, and Patricia's going to help us change the slides. Great. So since 2008, Craving Change has really been instrumental in filling a critical and a growing need for psychosocial services by teaching non-therapists. So we're talking about dietitians, nurses, physios, kinesiologists, doctors, whole range of different clinicians to apply cognitive behavioral techniques in their practice. And for years, we did dozens of in-person workshops across Canada, which we absolutely loved doing, but it wasn't feasible. And we were actually leaders, I would say, in e-learning when 10 years ago we pivoted our business model and started offering one of the very first online training and certification programs for health professionals. So now this made the information that we were sharing with our colleagues much more accessible. To date, there are over 3,000 regulated clinicians, primarily dietitians, who are trained and certified with Craving Change. And this has really helped us reach out and extend this philosophy, this approach that we've developed to more people. And there are actually over 50,000 of our client workbooks in circulation. So these aren't available to the public directly, but through clinicians who are licensed with our program. They've used these workbooks with a whole variety of people. Next slide. Just to let you know how versatile the program is, first of all, it can be used with individual clients, or it can be used as an adjunct to other programs, or just a workshop program on its own. So can be used in clinics like diabetes centers, healthcare centers, bariatric surgery clinics are using the program. The largest national grocery store chain in Canada has a corporate license with us, so their dietitians can use Craving Change, the framework, the resources and so on with their individual customers, or to do group workshops. And it's also we've got some great ideas of things you can use even if you just do shorter sessions like corporate lunch and learns and so on. Okay. All right, so what's the outline for today? We'll go over some of the principles of the Craving Change program. We'll also do a review of the cognitive behavioral model for those of you who aren't familiar with that, because that's sort of the basis of the program. We'll also run you through the intentional sequencing of the program, the workshop style of presentation. And then we're going to review some case studies and examples that'll demonstrate some of the tools and techniques for using craving change, particularly for things that we know you're often looking for ideas, say, for example, with your follow-up support groups. Or we've also recognized for many people working with those who are learning to manage their weight, what to do when they're trying to deal with a weight plateau, for example. And then we'll just briefly explain how you could train and certify with Craving Change if that's of interest. All right, so just very briefly, I'll sort of let you know how Colleen and I connected. So back in 2001, we were working at a diabetes, hypertension, and cholesterol education center. It was a multidisciplinary team. I had been learning all kinds of skills for behavior modification and different counseling skills and so on. Um, and um, and I mean, I felt I was really connecting with clients. We were problem solving, we were coming up with great goals and so on. But there were some clients that still, although they were really keen and they had a good understanding of the nutrition guidelines for their blood sugars, blood pressure, cholesterol levels, they really struggled to try and make those changes, or particularly to sustain them. So I knew that there was something kind of missing, something I needed to still work on. And I felt that it was this whole notion of understanding and managing why the clients were eating the way they were. So this needed some exploration for myself and for the clients. And I did some reading, I went to lectures, I went to courses. But most importantly, what I started to do was to spend time with the psychologists that were in our clinic and to attend some of the programs that they were offering to our clients. And I particularly enjoyed going to Colleen's workshops. They were always very practical. She had a strong background in behavior change, in disordered eating, and yet also was very, you know, straightforward with ideas that people could use, very kind of action oriented, and that really appealed to me. And it was in one of the follow-up sessions to her, of one of her groups, that I really had a true aha moment. She presented this sort of eating self-awareness strategy, and truly, it was almost like I'd feel the light bulbs binging off in my head, and I thought, hey, this really makes sense. Like, this is a really great way to sort of tune into things. And I was watching the participants in the program at the time, and I could see they were all kind of, sparking with interest. So it was really after that although we'd been, often discussing different things we could do in our program, that really kind of got us motivated to develop a program based on the notion of why people eat the way they do, how to manage things like emotional eating that clients were addressing. So that was where we were. We can go to the next slide. So because one of the things we've said we would like to do in this webinar today is to share some of the more popular tools and techniques of the program, I'm going to start right off and sort of describe that particular activity that Colleen did that really, turned the light bulbs on for me. And we receive experiential assignments from clinicians who are certifying with our program every week. And I read every single one of those assignments. It's absolutely wonderful to hear how people are using our program. But I can tell you without question that the most popular activity in our program is the one I'm just going to demonstrate here. It's very simple. It's addressing reasons that we eat. So you just need a paper and pen or a flip chart or a whiteboard and a marker. And all you do is you write the heading, why we eat. And you encourage your client or you encourage a group to brainstorm as many reasons as possible, as quickly as possible, just within a few minutes. And you just say, we're going to fill up this whiteboard. We're going to fill up this flip chart. There are no right or wrong answers. Nobody interrupts. Nobody makes comments. There's no judgment. We're just going to fill up this sheet of paper. And believe me, it doesn't take long for that to happen. So then once you do that, you just set that aside. And next slide, please. And then you introduce this concept of 3 types of hunger. So this will be pretty intuitive, I think, for most of you. But for clients, the way you would describe it is that stomach hunger would be a physical hunger. It's when, obviously, it's been many hours since they've eaten. Their body needs fuel, it needs energy. Maybe you're eating certain foods for your health. You've been trying to eat more high fiber foods, or you're eating a snack to prevent a low blood sugar. So this is responding to physical needs of your body. Mouth hunger is what a lot of people would describe as cravings. So you're kind of looking for something that's crunchy and salty or smooth and creamy. It's something you've seen on TV and all of a sudden you want to eat it. It's you're looking for that pleasure of food. And then there's heart hunger, which most people can relate to, and they understand that that's eating in response to how you're feeling. And it can be positive emotions like celebrating, or it could be feeling some negative emotions and dealing with those. And heart hunger is also, we describe it as also learned behaviors around eating. And it's important to note that not all of these types of hunger are perfectly normal. They're 100% acceptable. There's nothing wrong with any of them. But it's just a way to try and distinguish why, getting back to that why question, why somebody might be looking for food, thinking about food, or eating. So you've discussed that, and we'll just look at the next slide. So then you go back to your list. So this is just an example of quite often what sort of list you would have as you've done your brainstorming. And I'll just share with you, we actually did this early on when we were introducing this concept. We did it at a Dietitians of Canada conference. So national conference, we had like hundreds of dietitians in the audience and said, okay, let's do this. And we filled up literally 2 sheets of paper on a flip chart. And nobody mentioned nutrition. So we laugh over that one. But what is very visual, and why this is so effective, particularly if you can do it with a group, is that people notice right away how many hearts are mentioned when you do this activity. And again, it's important to mention that there's nothing wrong with heart hunger. We do soothe ourselves with food. We do use food in various different ways. And it's if the client themselves is troubled by that, if they feel like this is contributing to some issues with their health, that they're not comfortable with the way they're eating, they want to make some changes, then if you've decided or determined that some of their eating is related to heart hunger, then you can work on that. And the one that always comes up on this list is bored. And I always like to mention to clients that, yeah, I mean, you can fill in 5 or 10 minutes by eating if you're bored, but afterwards you're probably still bored. And now you might feel, frustrated with yourself, or in some cases people feel guilty for eating when they're not physically hungry. So let's come up with some other ideas. The other thing is, it's important to say that if they do have mouth hunger, then really focus on enjoying that food. That is something that obviously you find pleasurable. Food should be pleasurable. So this is where, again, just how you respond to that trigger, how you respond to that type of hunger can help the clients learn to feel more comfortable. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to Colleen.
Thank you, Wendy. So I had this keener, Wendy Shaw, sitting in on my workshops, as she mentioned, and we decided, let's do our own workshop from the psych perspective and the dietitian perspective. And so we launched one called Food and Mood. We simply put up a poster using our dot matrix printer that sat at the registration desk saying, do emotions affect what you eat, when you eat, or how much you eat? Feel free to join us for this free workshop, and feel free to bring a friend, a family member. What our colleagues told us was, oh, great idea. No one's going to come though, because when and if people do talk to me about their emotional eating in my office, there's so much isolation and shame and humiliation around it. There's no way they'll go to a group, and there's certainly no way that men will attend. And I'm delighted to say that they were wrong on both of those counts, that in fact, it was hugely popular. It was the most in-demand education course that the Diabetes, Hypertension, and Cholesterol Center, and also where I was working too in cardiac rehab, cardiac rehabilitation clinic, it was the most popular course that was offered. I'll also note that when Wendy and I launched Craving Change and started traveling across the country teaching workshops, every time we talked to a flight attendant, a cab driver, a hotel staff about, oh, you've been in town for business or pleasure? Business, what's your business? We'd explain it in, sorry, pardon my voice. We'd explain it in a sentence or two, and they would then start talking about their favorite food or food and mood and their love for food and how they wish they could change their eating. It just had this intuitive appeal to people, which was incredibly exciting. So back then with food and mood, we were also lucky enough to partner with faculty at University of Calgary, Kristen von Ranson, and her, at that point, master's student. And they did a study in 2 sites with 60 participants. They've since published it, and that demonstrated a decrease in guilt and shame, which makes me as a psychologist very excited, an increase in eating self-efficacy, which I'm going to talk more about in a moment, and also a reported decrease in, quote, eating pathology. In other words, people eating in a way that they were upset about. We also noticed when we were doing food and mood that there was huge interest from other healthcare providers, and a delightful observation was we would have colleagues from all over the health region say, can we sit in? We heard about this workshop. Can we sit in? Don't worry, I'll just sit at the back. I won't interrupt. And as soon as Wendy would start doing the flip chart exercise, reasons why we eat, the colleagues sitting in would be just drawn right into the topic and talking about the reasons why we eat and our relationship with food. It just strikes that chord with folks. So next slide, please. So we launched Craving Change, and it's been 20 years now. What we've built is a Craving Change program for healthcare professionals in their work with members of the public. And as Wendy said, there's a workbook for the healthcare professionals to share with their members of the public. But our focus is on training our colleagues under the step care model of care and knowledge translation to apply these principles in their practice. And the program's objectives are to decrease feelings of shame and guilt. Very strong opinions about that. I would also add to that the isolation that can come with the shame and the guilt. The program acknowledges and normalizes the challenges most of us experiences when we're making eating behavior changes. It's really hard. We learn these relationships with food, possibly in utero, but certainly as an infant, and change is difficult. We know that with any health behavior. We also wanted to help people increase their awareness of their personal eating triggers and their, quote, problematic responses. So as I said, for people who are upset with what they're eating, how much they're eating, or when they're eating it, we wanted to help them understand better what led up to that, what created it. Why did I just do that? And now I'm upset all weekend. That's what we wanted to help people know more about, feel better about, and make changes with. We also wanted to help people develop eating self-efficacy. As I said, I'm going to talk about that more soon. It's a core concept in, okay, I got a pop-up. I am going to hit ignore. Good times. Wendy, if I disappear, take it away.
I will.
It was a computer pop-up, not a program pop-up. Self-efficacy is a critical factor from a psychological perspective in sustained health behavior change. Self-efficacy is often broken down into different components. Smoking cessation, self-efficacy, eating self-efficacy, Exercise self-efficacy. We wanted to help people increase their eating self-efficacy. And by that, to do that, we were going to teach them CBT techniques and skills to build confidence and the ability to better manage their eating behavior, even in challenging situations. So, it's important to me to explain what we mean when we talk about CBT. I recognize that many people attending today are very familiar with it today. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of where we're coming from. Oh, if you could advance the slide, please. Thank you. Craving Change is based on CBT. It's a gold standard theoretical model for disordered eating. It's tricky because these elements are so powerful. Most of them are also invisible, which is the nature of my job and the nature of our personal experiences often. Essentially, what this model says is that all three of these aspects of who we are as people strongly influence each other. So our thoughts affect our behaviors affect our thoughts. Our emotions affect our behaviors affect our emotions, and vice versa. And what can start with one thing, let's say an emotion, let's say feeling embarrassed. My pop-up on my screen 2 minutes ago is a good example of that. I felt embarrassed. That could create some thoughts. Those feelings and those thoughts then can create a behavior, like I apologize. Behaviors are observable. They're the part that are visible. So I might have stuttered in my speech. I might have gotten flustered. I might have gotten apologetic. That's what people can see. Thoughts and emotions are invisible. And by the way, one guideline I like to distinguish between what's a thought and what's an emotion, it gets actually quite tricky. You know, I was feeling really upset about my weekend. Is that a thought or an emotion? What I like to say to myself and to people to keep it more clear is emotions are one word, whereas thoughts are a bunch of words. So the emotion might be regretful, disappointed, excited, relieved. Thoughts would be a few words associated with that feeling. So I also want to mention that some of us are in touch with all three of these. Some of us struggle to be in touch with these. So don't be surprised if between yourselves, your loved ones, and your clients, you notice that some people are better sort of focusing on their behaviors. That just makes more sense to them. I got angry, I raised my voice, I can't find my keys, I keep showing up late, and they're focused on their behavior. Whereas some people are more sort of cognitive. They're in their thoughts a lot. So perfectionism, worrying, strategizing, planning, there are a million possibilities. And some people are more in their emotions. And by the way, I love this about human beings. And what I also love about this model is you can think about this really simple flowchart when you're watching yourself as you go and buy groceries. Just keep in mind how you're behaving, the thoughts and emotions underlying that, and in your conversations with people in your life, which of these three circles or all of these three circles you're more comfortable with. I could talk about that all day. So, what did I want to mention? Oh, there's also going to be a handout in your resource package that gives a good example of this that you can use with your clients. Okay, next slide. It's also really important to me to point out that our behaviors aren't just dictated by those individual factors. Well, there's one more individual factor certainly that can play a role, which is physiology. That might be a medication, that might be a lack of sleep, that might be pain, that could be physically being hungry, that could be I've had 3 cups of coffee this morning. So certainly our physiology influences those 3 things. Our circumstances, we might think, behave, and feel differently when we're by ourselves, when we're with other people, when we're at work, when my favorite, when I'm running late. I think my thoughts, behaviors, and emotions all change quite dramatically when I'm running late. So physiology and circumstances also play a role in those 3 individual circles, but also the social determinants of health, we know, play a direct role in people's experience of themselves in the world and in the different health behaviors that they engage in. Social determinants of health, of course, include things like systemic racism, access to resources, education, walkable communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those are all highly relevant in the decisions that people make day in and day out. Today, we're going to talk about those 3 circles, but I certainly never plan or hope to give the message that, well, if you just change your thinking, everything will be fine. If you just change your thinking, it might be your best option and it might give you more ideas, but it certainly won't help some of those other larger forces at play. So hope that's duly noted. Last slide is just a quick reminder that when you are working with a client who's describing a specific behavior that they'd like to change, you can pull out a piece of paper, a whiteboard, if you have some sort of doodling function, if you're seeing them online. You draw these 3 circles, you explain the 3 aspects of the circles as I just did. You write beside it, you'll see this on the worksheet that you get. You write beside it the behavior, let's say a bowl of ice cream that I don't even enjoy, but I'm having it a few times a week at night. You write down that behavior and you ask the client to remember this week and when they did that and it upset them, heading into the kitchen to decide heading into the kitchen, thinking they might want something to eat. What were the circumstances? What were they thinking? What they were feeling? Can they see how those thoughts and feelings might have contributed to that behavior, and whether or not it was helpful? And they might be able to problem solve with you other behaviors they could do in response to those thoughts and emotions that would actually help them think and feel differently, whether or not the ice cream did. So the handout explains that well. I don't want to spend too much time on that now. We can go on to the next one. Okay, so in addition to a theoretical framework for the Craving Change program, Wendy and I spent countless hours over the years revising, exploring, debating, updating, reading, and confirming what we felt was important to guide us. What are the principles of this program? Well, we know that a significant predictor of healthier eating habits is meal planning. Of course, we all know that this can be challenging to sustain, and many people, of course, can be very perfectionistic or rigid about their food plan. And of course, the predatory diet industry reinforces that as well, not to mention TikTok. I'm supposed to eat that, I'm not allowed to eat that, etc. We're not a fan of that. We're a fan of much more flexible eating. In fact, Wendy mentioned that she reads the evaluation forms that come in and has read well over 1,000 of them. And the 80-20 principle that we talk about that's reflected well here in these principles is overwhelmingly the strategy that clients report that clinicians report their clients reporting as the most mind-bending, exciting aha moment for them. The reality is that we encourage people to have a flexible, thoughtful, and occasionally spontaneous relationship with food and their health. We try to strike that balance of encouraging them to give themselves a break, but also the skills to stay on track with the health goals that they may have. Next, please. Sorry, I'm just keeping up here with my own notes to make sure I don't skip something. Also, the program principles are encouraging people to, and this is going to tie into self-efficacy in a moment, to respond rather than react. Right. So, we've all heard countless stories of folks, they're on track, they're feeling good about their weekend plans. They walk into the staff room and there's birthday cake or there's donuts, or walking through Costco and the free samples. That's all part of life. That's all part of loving and enjoying food. But when people are consistently upset about the decisions that they make, that can affect other parts of their eating and other parts of their mood and their well-being. And so Craving Change is about giving people the tools to make different decisions if they want, when they want. Much more than just, I'll try harder, hopefully I'll do better, God forbid, hopefully I'll be better next week. It's like, no. Your character has nothing to do with this. It's about accessing skills that help you make different decisions when you want to. And that moment of pause is hard. It's hard for all of us. And Craving Change reinforces over a dozen different ways to try to do that. And as I said, our agenda is that, if you will, is that people enjoy food, they roll with spontaneity, and they accomplish the behavior changes that they seek. Okay, next slide, please. Also, there's a core principle of the Craving Change program for facilitators, not the public. For facilitators, we're encouraging regulated healthcare professionals to skim under the surface of that eating behavior. So remember the three circles have behavior, the visible one in this analogy or metaphor, be the peak of the iceberg. And underneath the surface, which can be vast, that's where our thoughts and emotions lay, influencing the peak. Craving Change is that middle illustration where we believe that one of our core principles of our program is that, and this goes back to, by the way, the step care model of healthcare services, which say a general intervention offered by non-specialists can help a significant percentage of people looking for help. Those then requiring more specialized care can be referred on for more specialized care. So Craving Change is the middle, where you're not just talking about the eating behavior. Of course, there's a time and a place for doing that, but that's not Craving Change. We're not talking about food types or food quantities or complex carbohydrates, but you're skimming beneath the surface into the thoughts and the emotions affecting that behavior. The third column on the right, we put in a little diving bell, because that's where childhood abuse, body image, marital discord, mental illness, trauma, grief, all of the things that people are already mentioning to you in your practice, continue handling it as you do already in your practice. So, of course, you don't say, oh, don't tell me that, I don't want to hear it. You say, thank you for sharing. That makes complete sense. I'd really encourage you to talk to a colleague of mine who can help you explore that more fully, and you refer them. So that's all of our jobs to stay within our scope of practice on that front. Next slide, please.
And actually,
Oh,
if you want to go back to the icebergs
yeah,
for just a minute, I was just
please.
going to add, so just to clarify, Craving Change or this approach works best when your clients have had the tip of the iceberg information. So
Yes.
it's generally something that's introduced once the clients already know, okay, these are the things that will help me manage my blood sugars. I've learned, some of the principles for eating and for activity and so on. But when they've come back for follow-up, now they're running into some issues. Things that sounded so easy to change, for some reason they're having some challenges with that. And that's when you really get in there and work with them to dive under, just sort of skim under, I should say, under that behavior. The other thing I'll just mention is that psychologists in our program, when we first did this approach, told the dietitians, for example, that if we had used some of these CBT principles and techniques with clients, or people had attended that original food and mood program, that when they did see the psychologist, they were sort of much more able to zero in on what their concerns were, and that the psychologists didn't need to spend as much time doing basic education. So that actually then almost reduced the waiting list for the psychologists, because they spent less time educating and more time doing the therapy and the counseling. So it really did kind of help even with the capacity of our program. All right. So let me just mention that what we're going to be doing next is going through a few more details about the sequencing of the program, and then we'll get into the case studies and examples. So we'll switch to the next slide. And I just need to get rid of this. Oops, just a minute. Okay, so we've intentionally set up the workshop version of Craving Change in a way that has worked very well. It's been really quite proven over the years to be ideal for teaching clients. So right off the bat, we start off with information that helps clients understand why they're having so much difficulty making some changes. So we look at the influences of our sort of just our eating environment, our society, and so on, touch on a little bit about just the physiology and learning factors on eating. And this is very we sort of do it in a staged way, even for this, where we start with the environment, which is very global, it's universal. This is something that affects all of us. It's non-threatening. It helps people bond a little bit because they realize that they're all in the same situation. Moving on to the biology, or what happens in our body, again, fairly impersonal. And then we get into the more behaviors that are more learned and more personal. The next step then is to focus on what needs changing. And I know sometimes clients will get a little impatient because they want to get right in there and start making some changes and doing things. But the basis of behavior change is, first of all, awareness of what's going on. And so we've developed a number of tools and activities that clients can use in order to understand a little more about what some of their eating triggers are and how they might be responding to those eating triggers. And then a large portion of the program is this information that we review that teaches people cognitive behavioral techniques and skills in order to make some changes. And we're going to be giving you some examples of those. And then lastly, we also definitely discuss how to sustain changes. So talk about relapse prevention, goal setting, that kind of thing. But generally this can be covered over about 3 weeks. The clients always need time between sessions in order to do this. All right, so we'll move to the next slide. So one of the things we do is to discuss the topic of eating under the influence of our environment. And this is really a fun activity. It's one of those things that's a really great conversation starter. And you can just use the question, what's different about the way that we live and eat now compared to 50 years ago? And you get all sorts of discussions around, well, yeah, we're eating on the run because we're so busy. Packages are bigger, portions are bigger. There's all sorts of marketing and eating invitations out there all the time. Just more awareness of just how we're being influenced by our environment. And I would suggest that this is always a great time with this type of discussion, which can be perfect for follow-up support groups and so on, that we look at sharing ourselves and some examples that we have ourselves where we're struggling to always make choices that we feel are healthy for ourselves. It's so important for people to realize that they're not alone in this situation, and that they can just feel less like it's their fault. This is normal. There's always a lot of laughter and sharing in this particular activity, and I feel like it sort of loosens everybody up, and even with an individual client, so that they're more receptive to other information after that. Okay, so next slide. All right, so the 3 circles are helpful for introducing the CBT approach with clients, but I particularly like using this iceberg example for generating some discussion. And this is something that we share a lot. We did develop this a long time ago, and other people are starting to use this as well in programs, but it really is visual again, where you talk to someone about what they're troubled with, ask them if they're interested in discussing and exploring it a little bit more, and then you start to help them envision where they might be at the time when they're experiencing that eating behavior. As Colleen mentioned, looking at the different circumstances, and then seeing if they can imagine themselves in that situation and what might they be thinking, just trying to tune into their thoughts, and then also identify some of their feelings. So just as an example here, as I mentioned, we get these, you can go to the next slide. So in this example, we actually got this from a client clinician who sent in their experiential assignment just last week. And this was a 53-year-old male that they had been having this counseling session with. And he had identified that he was concerned with some snacking after supper. So after discussing sort of the situation with this gentleman, it was discovered that he was often alone in the evening, sitting on the couch watching Netflix or some sort of sports, generally checking his work emails on his cell phone. So even though he was done work, he was still basically in work mode. And he was able to say that he never would get a break from work. This is how he was feeling. He felt fatigued, anxious. He had this sort of sense of burnout. And I'm just going to read sort of what they came up with. So he came up with this strategy that when he felt this way, maybe what he could do is just sort of take a break and get out and go for a walk, or go out to the garage and work on some things. He planned only to do it for 10 or 15 minutes, so he was fairly realistic. He also decided not to check or reply to his emails after 7 p.m. So I'm just reading off of what was submitted. And he included a statement in his e-signature line to set up an auto reply so that anyone sending messages after 7 p.m. wouldn't expect a reply till the next business day. So simply doing some of those things really made a difference for him. And he started to notice that he was making some positive changes with his eating and started to make some connections. So next slide, please. So what you'll notice sometimes is that when you've talked to people and you've established some action plans or goals at the end, that those action plans may have nothing to do with food and yet everything to do with eating. Next slide.
Okay. I mentioned self-efficacy. Again, Google Scholar it, you'll see that it's critical in sustained health behavior change. Self-efficacy is people's report that they have skills to handle challenging situations, and the confidence to use those skills in challenging situations. So it's next slide, please. Oh, good that my photo didn't come up on my slide. I'm glad it did on there. So our program includes over 14 cognitive and behavioral skills. Each are explained briefly. There's a resource to help people get into the concept. And then there's here's what you do, here's how you try it. And very much try it, experiment, give it a shot, try it this week and see what you learn. The goal is not that people master dozens of skills, it's that they try many different skills and they learn what works best for them. Next, please. Wendy?
Okay, so one of the things that clients aren't often as familiar with is this whole idea of tuning into their thoughts. And one of the things that I sometimes share with them, or I mean, I'll share with you, I honestly have noticed that I have my best ideas in the shower. And I was thinking, well, why is I'll get out of the shower. I mean, I even leave a piece of paper and pencil on the vanity just so I can jot what I get when I'm in the shower. But I think it's because the fact is, I mean, we hardly have any moments in our day where we're not being, sort of our thoughts aren't being affected by things like podcasts and television and games and audiobooks and text pings and stream. I mean, there's just so much going on all the time that it's very challenging to listen to our thoughts these days. It's not like, in the olden days where you were just out plowing the fields or washing the floor or going for a walk and there were no distractions. So you actually heard your thoughts. So I think we tend to ignore them very often. Next slide. So again, this is just something that you're doing to help encourage people to be more aware. So another case study that we'll just share with you is that after meeting with this woman, for example, you discover that she's concerned with some frequent grazing, like she's been snacking a lot more during the day than she used to. So, okay, so what are the circumstances? What are some things that are going on in her life? Well, you find out that since COVID, this woman's been working from home and has been encouraged to continue to work from home, which we all know has its positives. However, her home office is located on the kitchen table. There's no other space for her. She's having to use her laptop, versus her work desktop. So it's kind of difficult for her because this is smaller. And she's really feeling a lack of social contact with her coworkers. And meanwhile, it's affecting her lipid levels. So a couple techniques that you might offer that you could discuss with her would be what we call delay, or put your craving on hold, or distraction. Next slide. So with the delay, basically what you're teaching the client is for them to be a little more skillful at resisting the urges to eat if they're feeling troubled by this happening too often. Because they're still giving themselves permission to eat, they're not actually going to feel deprived or like a failure if they do eat what they're craving. And they eventually kind of learn how long it takes them to kind of get through that, like to what we could say, ride the craving wave, for example. So all of our strategies in the How to Change section of our program always have a here's what you do, a sort of a set of steps that people can follow. So for this one, we would say, give yourself permission to eat what you're craving, but wait a little bit of time. Start with just really short delays, maybe a minute before you actually just respond to that craving. And that gives a person a little bit more empowerment over the food. Gradually increase the delay, and it seems like often it's about 15 minutes, where if people can wait that long, they honestly just don't feel that urge to eat that food as much. And during the pause, they can ask themselves, well, gosh, is this stomach, mouth, or heart hunger? And maybe rate their hunger level. Maybe drink some water. They might actually be thirsty instead of hungry. So it just gives that little bit of time. Next slide, please. Also, it's helpful if they are waiting to have some distractions. So distract themselves from thinking about food, maybe move away from the area that they're in, maybe do another activity that takes their mind off of food. Those are things that can be helpful. So it's very helpful to have a list like that. This kind of list is fun to develop, by the way, with groups, say in support groups and that kind of thing, that they can take away. They're a little more personalized than this one that we'll have in your package. But also in a case like this, also you'd want to be dealing with underlying eating triggers, like finding ways that this woman could connect with her coworkers, maybe brainstorm if there's any way that they can, you can find another place for her to spend some time with in her home with work. And even just, getting out and going for a walk instead of eating, of course, is a standard suggestion.
Okay. Self-talk. How we talk to ourselves reflects some of our more prominent thought patterns. I often will joke with clients and friends and loved ones that if you ever want to really tune into how you're talking to yourself, imagine that a loudspeaker is grafted to the side of your head, and now you've lost your keys or gotten a parking ticket, or you're running late, or you've been disappointed, or you're looking in the mirror, and imagine all the people around you can hear what you're thinking. And most of us have that sort of cringy response. But why? Well, it's for this reason that how we talk to ourselves is a reflection of some of our more prominent thought patterns, particularly when things go wrong or when we don't like what's happening or what we see. So we can't imagine that we'd expose the people around us to those sorts of thoughts, but we expose ourselves to those thoughts all of the time. So, and some of those thoughts, if I ask people, are you your own worst critic? In fact, I don't know that I've ever asked somebody that and not had them say, yeah, I am. Well, if you did music as a kid or sport as a kid, or maybe you were an artist, those of us who did those things or tried those things probably remember what it was like to have a harsh, mean-spirited coach or teacher. In fact, I work with people all the time who gave up their sport or their music or their art because of a harsh or mean-spirited teacher, or they could still hear their voice in their head. It's not helpful. It's not constructive. And let's see if I can make my screen do what I need it to do. There we go. Messing with me. Okay, next slide, please. So self-talk works for us and it works against us. And I've been a clinical psychologist for 25 years, and I still remind myself frequently to focus on self-talk that works for me. So on the slide, if you could, I didn't want to add all these animations, if you could read from left to right. So self-compassion, we know this works for us. Self-criticism usually works against us. Taking responsibility, again, also usually works for us. It helps us learn and grow and change and adapt. Blame tends to work against us. It tends to not be very constructive. Self-talk that works for us includes empowering, self-sufficient, and encouraging statements. With powerlessness, helplessness, and discouragement, it's kind of like there's not anything to do with those. You don't have, why bother? What's the point? It's not helpful. It's not getting any better. There's nothing to do with those. There's lots to do with that previous column. Self-talk can also help you stick with your plan, roll with setbacks, and in fact, expect setbacks. They happen to all of us, and you can use self-talk to, in fact, remember the stages of change model, quote, relapse is considered the most valuable stage. That's where you learn the most. But if your self-talk is working against you, it's that demotivating, one step forward, 3 steps backwards. Why am I even bothering talk? Again, this is different patterns of self-talk in response to exactly the same event. Self-talk can also work for us by being self-soothing. We're upset. You can be compassionate and care for those difficult feelings. It can encourage effort, rest. It can help you self-manage your mood, your energy, access supports. Whereas, again, in response to exactly the same event, self-talk that works against us can be self-talk that fuels stress, anxiety, fear, low mood, and isolation. So it's critical. Next slide, please. Here's a fictitious, here's a fictitious example of a woman we're calling Meg. She's 28 years old. She's currently on leave following having a couple of kids. She's come to you because she's frustrated by her weight gain after having her kids, and her physician is cautioning her about her blood pressure. So she's frustrated, she's nervous, she's motivated. She has changed some of her eating habits. She joined her sister in a walking group, and initially was really enjoying it, really got into her air fryer, really got into the changes that she was making, and of course, loving the time with her sister. She lost 27 pounds, but she's now plateaued and she hasn't seen a change in her blood pressure. So what's concerning her is that she can feel she has had it. She's discouraged and her motivation is plummeting, and she's walking that line of, why did I do all of this and why would I continue doing all of this? I would recommend a technique that you could try is helping her with her self-talk, explaining that I understand, or you're describing, I hear that this is a frustrating situation for you and you're struggling with your motivation. Let's talk about how you talk to yourself about what's going on. Next slide, please. I will keep this brief. I could talk to you about this all day. I'd love to talk to you about this in another LinkedIn Live webinar if that interests you, folks who are attending. Any new skill. We were learning to juggle. We were learning to ride a unicycle. We were learning how to scuba dive. We were learning how to drive a standard car, an automatic car. It takes effort, energy, and repetition to see things differently and shift our mindset. You can't say that often enough to your clients. It takes practice, practice, practice. That's the number one challenge in my job. And I argue that's why there are no great TV shows about the process of psychology and psychology skills, is that it's not Michael B. Jordan doing a dramatic workout. It's sitting there and talking to yourself and talking to yourself and talking to yourself and practicing. So set your client's expectation that this does take practice, changing your self-talk. Also, the best time, just like juggling, the best time to learn that new skill and practice that new skill is when you're not upset. Don't practice juggling in front of 50 people. Practice juggling in your, in your basement for a while until you get good at it, where there's less stakes. So be aware of your self-talk when you're driving, when you're in a lineup, when you're cooking something, when you're going about your life and just feeling fine. Pay attention to that dialogue that's going through your mind and see if there's some adjustments that you could benefit from. Going back to Meg, next slide, please. I switched these columns to start with self-talk that works against her or for her. So again, reading left to right, why am I even bothering? What was the point of trying? Well, self-talk, I understand that feeling, but self-talk that might be more constructive for her is, you know what, I did love seeing my sister more, even though I'm disappointed. That was actually pretty cool this year. She's frustrated about the numbers. Of course, there's decades of research talking about people's hopes and expectations when they're heading into planned weight loss versus what they are likely to lose because of biology and other factors. Really frustrated with that number on the scale. Self-talk that can help with that is, well, I sure don't want to yo-yo. I don't want to keep going up and down. Maybe I can live with this. I'll give this a shot and see if, I feel better at this point in my journey, and maybe it'll be okay because I sure know I don't want to keep going up and down. Of course, the thought I failed again. Well, instead, how about I like my plan rather than failed? That was a pretty fun plan and it was good and I enjoyed it. I am annoyed, but I'm going to just give myself a break. Other types of self-talk and for people in this circumstance can be, well, fine. Okay, fine. I'll just coast here because nothing works. So whatever. As we all know, that greatly weight maintenance is a shift in thinking and a shift in behaviors that is still required to maintain weight because all of us are likely to gain weight with time, period, unless we're actively working on maintaining our weight. So self-talk can be, no, I'm not going to coast. I need to regroup because I need to stay here. So I need to focus on what I can maintain and stick within the long term, especially with a long, hot summer coming up. And the last point I made, because there can, of course, be lots of strong feelings around people's disappointment and discouragement. You'll notice the column on the right is not talking them out of any of that. It's okay. I'm disappointed. I'm upset. I'm really frustrated. I'm really not happy with myself or my body right now. Perhaps might be something they'd say, I'm going to take care of myself around these feelings. These are really harsh, hard, upsetting feelings. And I deserve to take care of myself around those feelings. It's hard. So could you just go to the next slide, please?
And I just wanted to make a
Yeah,
quick point there
please.
that
Yeah.
we also know so much more now about our body's physiology after losing a significant amount of weight. And I think that's so important that our patient and some of our clients are informed about
Oh, sure.
physiology changes.
For
Yeah,
sure.
of course, I'm just saying,
For sure.
but that now that the body may not change that much at this, typically it's about 6 months that this happens. Now they can work on their mind at this point. And this is where craving
Yeah.
change concepts come in perfectly at about that 6-month follow-up
Yeah.
time for these sort of clients. Nope,
Well
go
said.
ahead. We've
Okay.
got a few minutes left.
Yep. I promise I'll be quick. I just wanted to make the point that in what I said earlier and in the handout that is in your resource package, I try not to use the word positive self-talk. I know it comes up because that's often how it's spoken about. That easily becomes toxic, what's known as toxic positivity. You can also Google that if you'd like. In other words, trite platitudes. So in psychology and CBT, it's not about flipping your thoughts from negative to positive. It's flipping your thoughts from negative to more moderate and accurate. To clients, I'll say more accurate or less harsh. The platitudes, absolutes, the at least look on the bright side, that is not adjusting your self-talk. And that's not what I'm encouraging you to do. And that's explained well, actually. I think next slide, please. On our handout, we explained it very briefly because it's not a deep dive into this topic. Oh my gosh, can I read this? It says in the middle, just before the gray box, you could replace the negative thought with positive statements, but none of these are platitudes. I'm human. You're looking at my nose. Sorry about that. I'm human and I'm allowed to make mistakes. I'm still learning. I'll catch on. I need to give myself more time. Those aren't pie in the sky platitudes and trite dismissals. It's more accurate and less harsh. Positive is not exactly the right word, but that's the word everybody uses all the time. Wendy, I've left you with 2 minutes. You're welcome. Sorry.
Right. So we wanted to let you know that you can access not only the types of hunger tool that I demonstrated off of our website, but also Patricia's put in a link in the chat where you can download our toolkit that I guess you could call a little mini toolkit that has these different packages. There's also the QR code here on the screen right now. So we'll leave the links on the chat box there. I did want to just mention, if we can show the next slide, that if you are interested, if this is appealing to you, if you can see how this might enhance your practice, we have what we call a complete facilitator kit. And this includes a 3-year license to use our program materials and concepts. With that, you would be shipped out a facilitator manual, a package of workbooks to get you started with your clients. We also have all kinds of extra downloadable resources that are available online. There are evaluation forms, PowerPoint slide decks, and then, of course, the online training video and certification exam. Next slide. So there are steps to certify. The first would be to simply read over the license and agree to the terms. Then if you've purchased the Complete Facilitator Kit, we ship out the printed materials to you. You review the manual and the resources, and you have 120 days of online access to the training modules and to the certification exam. It's a multiple choice exam. It's online, plus it includes this experiential assignment, as I just mentioned. We only offer the Craving Change program to regulated healthcare professions. We feel this is a sensitive area. It's a topic that requires a lot of training and so on. And the program itself is eligible to dietitians for 10 professional education units. And I understand that May is recertification time for dietitians in the States. So this might be an option to get some more points.
We just got some beautiful feedback from folks. Thank you so much. It's a genuine pleasure to do this and to work with you and to connect with like-minded colleagues, really.